From the metaverse to augmented reality, gaming to digital art, what do all these have in common? They're all innovations that are only able to be brought forth in growth in the ways we're able to process media. This all began back in 1816 when the first camera was made, giving life to new ways we can experience media. All of a sudden, we were able to capture things in the moment and relive those memories with the visuals, something that was nearly unheard of before. Fast forward 100 years, and we get a big box with a tiny screen displaying live media, where you could experience the action like you were right there. This was obviously a massive disruption. We got a whole new perspective to how we could take in media, because prior to this, it was all just still images and paintings. Fast forward to modern day, and TVs are almost a thing of the past. We're now seeing even multimedia players that can fit in the palm of our hands or in our pockets. And as we look forwards toward the future, there are obvious visual innovations we're beginning to see take place, with things like the metaverse, virtual and augmented reality, the evolutions in gaming, and so much more. The vision is there, so now the question is, what technological breakthroughs will it take to actually get us there? Jules Urbach has spent his entire career around the goals of enabling realistic quality 3D rendered graphics into a real world. It's quite an odd yet really cool and unique goal in my opinion.
I'm Tokenicer, and since 2020 I've put in well over 5,000 hours of research in the blockchain and crypto space. I'm here to bring you only the highest quality deep research from the depths of the blockchain industry. While you're here, don't forget to check out tokenicer.network for my free email newsletter of more content around the blockchain space, in addition to all my content platforms linked right in one spot, from my Twitter threads, Medium articles, Spotify podcasts, and so much more. And before we get back to it, I just gotta remind you guys real quick that I'm not a financial advisor, and therefore please don't take anything you hear or see from me as any form of financial or investment advice. But without any further delays, let's dive right down the rabbit hole.
Within the blockchain space, we've seen dozens of projects beginning to try and capture the innovative value of the metaverse and graphics-based utilities, like play-to-earn gaming or NFTs. From things like Decentraland, The Sandbox, Axie Infinity, Gala Games, ApeCoins, and the list goes on. Most of these guys probably consider this the infrastructure to begin developing the metaverse. But we're missing one core ingredient and step that'll actually allow all this to function at scale. And that's the ability to truly process and render these digital assets into our world at a quality that evolves in accordance to our technology. If we're finding all these new ways to own art, play games, experience alternative realities, and consume media, shouldn't the way we process and capture this media also be disrupted? Well, that's exactly what Render Network is here to do, with perhaps one of the most unique initiatives in all of the blockchain space. So often we hear networks that are promising things like a fully scalable network to build on, universal interoperability. Of course, these are critical pieces of infrastructure to let DLT thrive at scale. But there literally isn't another project that's focused on our ability to render and expand on the current quality and visuals from the media we take in every day. Aside from Render Network, of course. But what exactly is rendering? Another term for rendering is image synthesis, and essentially it's the process of transforming a 2D or 3D computer model into a photorealistic image or scene. It could be a simple cartoon scene on TV, a scene in a Disney film, your neighborhood on Google Street View, or even some land in the metaverse. Now, some of you may be thinking that this is incredibly niche, or that it must be a tiny market for how specific this is. So let's try to reverse engineer this and break it down a little bit. Think of all the media you consume on a day-to-day basis. Phones, TVs, video games, digital ads. These are all possible because of rendered graphics being displayed. At this point, you probably understand that Render is a network focused on rendering graphics, which is just the tip of the iceberg. So let's keep diving down the rabbit hole. So Render Network is actually an evolution of the founder Jules Urbach's initial vision, as his initial company, Otoy, is the founder and parent company to Render. And so because of this, both companies obviously share a pretty similar goal and initiative they're building towards. Founded in 2008, Otoy is a computer graphics company that is innovating the content creation and delivery space by moving all the graphic processing and rendering to the cloud. Their core product is Octane Render, which is a GPU render engine that provides speed and quality at a level of their own. And well, the work kind of speaks for itself. Just to give you guys an idea of how well their technology is stated to be working, a decade ago when Ratatouille was released, you know that Disney movie of the rat that's pulling the guy's hair to cook? It's stated that each frame took 6.5 hours to render. And compare that to today with Otoy, they have instant real-time rendering of photorealistic scenes. Their technology can be seen integrated with some of the biggest names in the media and graphics space with guys like Unity, Apple, Star Trek, Samsung, and even Disney. And so that's quite the list of partners already, right? And essentially these integrations and partnerships have all been focused on, you guessed it, innovating media delivery, and for some of them even accelerating the development of holographic content, which is a pretty innovative idea in itself. It's one of those things we always see in futuristic based sci-fi movies, but we never really think of how we would get there. Well, the Render Network could be one of those solutions. It's a globally distributed network of GPUs that connect people demanding render jobs to these GPUs, and essentially they process and render the respective files, and in return the GPU renderers, or what's referred to as the nodes on the network, will be paid by the ones who submitted the render job in RNDR tokens. Pretty easy to understand mechanics on the ecosystem aspects of render, right? It's a network matching people demanding render jobs and GPUs together, while the medium of exchange for their services are in RNDR. And so this ecosystem also plays directly into Otoy's business, as when the payments in RNDR for these tasks get sent, Otoy takes a small percentage of these fees for maintaining and facilitating the network. So while the network itself is managed by the Render Foundation and Otoy, the purpose is for the rendering of these jobs to be as decentralized and globally distributed as possible. As we were speaking about before, the evolutions in ways we visually take in media is evolving at an exponential rate. Now factor in how every operation is beginning to go digital. It's not just the way we communicate, but think of virtual house tours, which are now becoming more mainstream than ever before. The large digital billboards that you see driving by any metropolitan area, or even this video that you're watching at this very moment. These are all tasks that require rendering ability, with many of them requiring computational power far exceeding what the device that requested the rendering job has. And for as long as digital media has been around, this has kind of been a problem that's lurked around, especially for those who don't have the resources to upgrade to a stronger computer. If you've ever messed around video or photo editing or playing some high resolution games only to realize your computer couldn't handle the load, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. This makes it so that anybody, regardless of their knowledge in rendering or digital media, can begin earning by providing real value to those who need the computational power. Render Network is leveraging the capabilities of a distributed network to globally distribute these rendering tasks, and then have the ecosystem economics over top of it with the RNDR token. And I would argue that this is definitely an in-demand and effective niche that they're targeting. The purpose of using a blockchain in their operations is for the provenance and immutability of the data stored on-chain to verify all the tasks and requests that took place. The step-by-step as to how this works begins with users creating accounts that are linked to the Ethereum or eventually Solana blockchain through smart contracts and their unique wallet addresses. After this, they can request specific rendering and streaming services, and the network will fulfill a smart contract that will calculate the costs in RNDR for the respective service. The method they use for ensuring good actors on the network, making sure that these render jobs are being done right, is through a reputation score and ranking that ranges from 1 to 100. New renderers that join the network will start with a score of 60 and move accordingly to their performance. And your score goes up with tasks you complete, scaling by difficulty, and goes down if you're not completing your tasks. Pretty self-explanatory, right? And because of the capabilities of a blockchain network, we can always ensure that tasks are being carried out honestly and corners aren't being cut. Say, for example, Bob requests an image to be rendered and processed, and Alice takes on this task, but for the purpose of saving time and money, she decides to render it at a lower quality than requested. This data is all obviously stored and recorded on the blockchain, from the process of the file rendering to the stage in the procedures, all logged and recorded on chain. So not only would Bob see the visual thumbnail of his image being rendered at a lower quality, but he would see the data of the file on chain that may say something like image rendered at 1920 pixels rather than the 2560 pixels he had originally requested for. And this is where their proof of render consensus comes into play, as the smart contract and system will only process and execute transactions in which the final product matches the outline requests in the initial transaction. So overall, the render network is not only solving a real problem with the exponential rise in our visual media intake across various industries, ranging from the media that we look at, from the entertainment sector, such as movies and video games, all the way to industries like healthcare or logistics, where we're seeing the importance of things like digital scanning and digital twins. It truly does capture a really large part of the innovations that's lining up for the future, as everything these days is not just visual, but digital. Now that we've got a pretty clear idea on how the render network and ecosystem fundamentally flows and sustains itself, let's take a look into the brains of the team and see who's behind this one-of-a-kind initiative with blockchain. Spearheading all the innovations and the vision for the render network is Jules Urbach. He's had over 25 years of experience in the space of graphics and rendering. In his beginnings at the young age of 18, he decided to forego the traditional route of success of attending an Ivy League school such as Harvard. Instead, Jules dedicated his time to creating his first video game, Hellcab. You may have heard of this game before. It was released in 1993 by Time Warner Interactive as one of the first ever CD-ROM games. Essentially, you get a tour around New York in a cab until things start to go a little upside down and you gotta escape from hell. Jules also founded the Groove Alliance, which has since been closed down, but this was a video game development company where Jules created Real Pool, another video game. And what was cool about Real Pool was that it was the first ever 3D game available on Shockwave.com. Shockwave is one of those websites you go on to play those arcade-like computer games. And then prior to founding Otoy, Jules had created the first ever web-based 3D video game platform, which he licensed to some massive companies with names such as Microsoft, Macromedia, Disney, Warner Brothers, Nickelodeon, Hasbro, and AT&T. Needless to say, that's quite a massive feat in itself already. And then with his work in Otoy, he also made some very key connections that of course tie to the respective field of render network in some of their work, such as animating VR and holographic experience for franchises like Batman and Disney, finding new avenues of content for HBO, integrating Octane Render with Unreal Engine for the highest quality of graphics with Epic Games, creating 360-degree video compatibility with Facebook, integrations of Octane Render in Apple products, and the list goes on. This not only shows the competence and connections within Otoy and Octane Render solutions, but it also shows just how connected and the level of work that Jules has brought to the industry since day one. As we stated earlier, his entire career goal has been to democratize and bring the innovations of 3D rendered realistic graphics to life. And with Otoy and Render, these are the infrastructures to building that vision out, as Jules was already imagining the concepts of distributed cloud rendering far before there were even words to describe it. Continuing on with the topic of large media, there's also J.J. Abrams on this team. And if you're a film fanatic, you may have seen or heard of this name before. That's because J.J. Abrams is actually a very well-known Hollywood filmmaker, with some of the most notable titles under his belt being Star Trek, Star Wars, and Mission Impossible. These are all renounced and critically acclaimed films, and you may have noticed, but films like Star Wars and Star Trek, where they take place in the distant future, far away from Earth, this seems like something that would take a lot of rendering to properly bring that into production, doesn't it? Think of the intergalactic scenes in Star Trek and Star Wars, and those frames where they're showing these spacecrafts in action. JJ clearly brings an extensive background and some of the biggest connections in the media and film CGI or rendering space, making him a perfect advisor for the Render Network in further progressing how their rendering could best fit the film media scene, while also using his personal network in the industry to connect other film creators to this disruptive solution. Ariel Emanuel is another key advisor to the Render team, and his previous experience comes from the sports side of entertainment and media. He's the CEO of Endeavor, which is a publicly listed company on the New York Stock Exchange that has long-term partnerships with some sports media giants such as ESPN, WWE, and UFC. Since then, they've received praise and titles with the likes of one of the fastest-growing companies in America, along with being listed as Fast Company's most innovative companies. The sports media side may just be one slice of the pie of what we take in regards to digital media. But think of all the other innovations and other branches that comes from it. Watching sports games and events from your TV. The experience behind this is already being experimented with different views and angles to give users a more realistic courtside experience. These continue to get more and more realistic with enhanced graphics and a more immersive experience, especially with the rise of mixed realities. Moving on, there's also Mike Winkleman, or better known as Beeple. Yes, this is the same heavily praised famous NFT artist that created one of the most expensive NFTs sold recorded to date with a price tag of $69 million. I don't think I really need to go too far in depth as to what Beeple brings to the table as an advisor for Render. Beyond being an advisor, he's also a heavy regular user of the Render Network, which makes a lot of sense given his work, right? Very few people will have the knowledge and experience of what makes a sufficient rendering network creators will use to the level that Beeple has with his background. Brendan Eich, another advisor to Render. His background comes from Brave Browser as the CEO and co-founder. Perhaps some of you guys have heard of Brave Browser before. It's basically a browser and search engine as an alternative to Google Chrome. The pitch of it is that it's faster, more privacy focused, and crypto rewards oriented, through rewarding users by using their browser with basic attention token. I've personally been using the search engine for about 3 years now and have had no complaints. Now, even prior to Brave and basic attention token, Brendan has had quite an impressive background in the world of tech. He served as CTO and eventually CEO for Mozilla Corporation. This is the subsidiary of the Mozilla Foundation that's focused on the developments of internet-related applications, most notably their browser Mozilla Firefox, which Brendan actually helped launch back in 2004. And when we talk about web development and internet infrastructure, of course, programming and the different respective languages are at the infrastructure of all of that, with JavaScript likely being the most popular programming language, especially for front-end development on the web right now. In fact, it's stated in a survey by Statista that 65% of developers use JavaScript for their regular operations. Well, believe it or not, Brendan is actually the inventor for JavaScript. So Brendan not only brings an extremely polished background through web browser design and experience, which is where we take in the overwhelming majority of digital media on the web. Now factor in that he's the founder of JavaScript, which is used in whoever knows however many digital media display platforms for end users today. Now, the last core member for Render we'll cover is Jennifer Zhu Scott. And let's just say her background is a little different compared to the guys we've been looking at throughout this breakdown. For the most part, we've been looking at innovators and leaders in media. Whereas with Jennifer, she's much more on the side of regulated utilities we talk about when we discuss things like connections with projects like Quant, Hedera, and that side of things with a long list of accolades. So let's just break it down. So Jennifer is currently a founding partner of IN Capital, which is a venture capital firm based in Beijing, China, focused on innovations in AI, biotech, and other deep parts of big data and big tech. But a little more background and history. Back in 2013, she was recognized by the World Economic Forum as a young global leader, which the World Economic Forum describes as an accelerator for a dynamic community of exceptional young people with the vision, courage, and influence to drive positive change around the world. Then in 2014, Jennifer was appointed as one of 18 council members for the China Council by the Global Agenda Council, which is a World Economic Forum think tank. She got reappointed in 2016 by the World Economic Forum in being one of 20 members responsible for the creation of the Council of the Future of Blockchain. She also earned the title of Top 50 Woman in Tech in 2018, and then afterwards in 2019 she earned the title of co-chair of the Fortune Global Tech Forum. And to top the list off, Jennifer also consulted season 5 and 6 of the HBO show Silicon Valley, in addition to having a TED Talk titled Why You Should Get Paid for Your Data, which now has accumulated over 4 million views. So now you guys can see, Jennifer's background isn't quite like the rest of the Render team. If anything, far from it, aside from the fact that they're all leaders in tech. But it's also a huge benefit for the Render team to have someone like Jennifer who's so deeply connected with the world of intergovernmental organizations and having the experience to be selected as one of the members of various World Economic Forum consortiums. Overall, the Render core team brings some heavy hitters in various parts of the media industry, ranging from sci-fi and critically acclaimed films to the sports part of entertainment, a world of web and programming experience, mixed in with some deep connections to the World Economic Forum in China. All while being spearheaded by Jules Urbach, a seasoned veteran in the digital media creation space. That seems like a recipe for success. But now that we've looked into the team at Render, let's quickly go over some of their respective connections and collaborations. Let's start with Apple. I don't think I need to introduce what Apple is. They're just one of the largest companies in the world, nothing too special. There's a pretty good chance you're watching this on an Apple device, and this video was actually created with an Apple device. Quite fitting. Well, Apple has actually collaborated with Render by integrating and having Octane Render as they launched Octane X for M1 MacBooks, iMacs, and most recently iPads too, which gives them access to Octane Render's visual effects software library. In fact, when we look at this Apple commercial introducing their newest iPads, we can actually see and hear that they mention Octane X, and perhaps the most eye-opening part. If we really slow down the frames toward the end of the video, as they're using an editing application, for a few split frames, what can you see? That's right, the Render network. Now, as we know, largely thanks to Steve Jobs, Apple has always been very forward-thinking and innovative in regards to their products and roadmap, which we can clearly see with their recent announcement of the Vision Pro, which is their mixed reality headset. And so to enable this technology to flourish, we need the static 2D imaging to evolve into intelligent 3D immersive media, while also taking all the spatial rendering into account. Now, aside from Apple, Render has also talked with some other massive names in the big tech space. Microsoft and Google are two of the most dominant tech companies in the world and make up for a large majority of the market in the internet industry as a whole today. Both of them have actually joined the Render network by launching their own GPU nodes, which is of course huge given that not only are these two some of the largest tech companies in the world, but with the abundance of users and content shared on these platforms and softwares. Imagine the amount of rendering jobs and resource capabilities at their hands. And while no complete official announcement, we know that Jules Urbach and Jensen Huang, the NVIDIA CEO, are in close contacts and have spoken at multiple events, which makes sense given the synergy between the two of them. And while, again, there's no official partnership with NVIDIA, we have seen the Render team working closely with the NVIDIA Omniverse team, which is their platform for allowing metaverse applications and experiences. Moving on to the entertainment media end of things, as we mentioned earlier, there are various members in the Render team that had built a long list of strong experience in media and entertainment. So it only makes sense that these guys would also use the Render network and the solutions for their respective tasks before officially joining the team, right? HBO was one we were discussing during Jennifer's experience as she advised the series Silicon Valley. As most of you guys know, HBO is a very popular cable TV company, And one of their most recent successful shows, The Last of Us, actually had their opening scene rendered using Octane. We also talked on J.J. Abrams' role in filmmaking with some large blockbuster titles such as Star Trek and Star Wars. While Paramount Studios is one of the oldest film studios in the world, and they were actually the first large filmmaker studio to use the concept of decentralized GPUs and render network for their remake of Star Trek in 4K. And beyond this, there's actually a life-sized, immersive Star Trek Enterprise created and replicated using none other than the solutions from Render and Octane. And as you guys can see, it almost looks better than it does in the movies. I've never actually watched Star Trek, but based on what I see here, it seems about as good as it gets for sci-fi related recreations. PUBG is one of the more popular games with roughly 285 million players logging in per month, and they've accumulated over $13 billion in total revenue. Well, the Season 9 introduction of PUBG came with a launch video that was completely rendered by Render Network. deadmau5 is a famous DJ and house producer who has won multiple awards in his field. Well, for his music video Pomegranate, which features the Neptunes, they of course used Render Network to render and create the music video, which you can kind of tell by watching the video itself. As you guys can see, it presents insanely clean visuals and graphics. And the last render collaboration we'll discuss is with Stable Diffusion. This is an AI text-to-image generator, so think like Midjourney or DALL-E. Well, Stable Diffusion actually got added into the Render Network and the Render website, which opens up a whole new avenue of ideas and possibilities the Render Network could be utilized for as we see more and more AI image generation coming to life. And now finally, now that we've covered the fundamentals, utilities, core team, and connections, let's take a brief look at their tokenomics. So as explained before, the RNDR token's primary utility is for fueling the Render Network, where most Layer 1 networks say their token is the fuel for their network and it's essentially just for paying gas and fees. But rather, RNDR is used to exchange value for rendering and streaming tasks between people looking for services and those allocating their GPUs for these services. They also recently announced a feature called the Burn Mint Equilibrium, or the BME for short, which they'll be looking to integrate in the near future. Essentially what this does is price the services on the network in fiat. So think of how Quant's licenses are done or Energy Web's fiat-based credits thanks to R3. It's the same thing here, just instead of licenses or energy credits, it's rendering jobs being priced in fiat now, which enables prices for these services to be far more predictable and much more consistent than if it were priced in crypto assets. Well, users can now choose to pay for the service in RNDR or fiat, but regardless, in the end, it gets converted into RNDR from distributed liquidity pools. So 95% of the fiat will be converted into RNDR, while the other 5% goes to the Render Foundation for funding and running the network. And essentially, once the render is converted, it now all burns. And then after the task is complete, the RNDR gets reminted and rewarded to those who carried out the tasks. Now, some of you guys are probably kind of confused at this point. So you buy RNDR for their network services just to burn it, and for the network to remint it to distribute them. That doesn't sound like tokenomics that are efficient or make much sense, do they? Well, here's the catch. There's actually an emission cap to how much RNDR can be minted within a single time frame, but there's not a limit to how much RNDR can be burnt. Which means that if more RNDR is burnt for the services than minted for distribution, RNDR will become deflationary for that given time. Let's take this as an example. Say the cap is 100,000 tokens being distributed. There's not actually an exact number on this as it's a variable that will move depending on the network demands, but for the sake of this example, let's say it's 100,000 RNDR, and let's say the price of RNDR is $2. Well, that means $200,000 worth of RNDR can be distributed to the nodes that completed the jobs. And so if the value of the cumulative jobs requested in that time frame was $200,000 worth, then the network would be at a perfect equilibrium, where the exact number of tokens burnt or used and number of tokens distributed is the exact same. But say in the following time span, there is now more demand for the network, but the cap and price of RNDR stays the same. Well, now you're getting a deflationary ecosystem, as it must have meant that there were requests for jobs that totaled up to over $200,000 worth of RNDR being purchased and burnt when submitted to the network, while there were only exactly $200,000 worth of RNDR being distributed back onto the network. I'm usually not a fan of burn mechanisms, as more often than not, it's seen as an attention grabber and signals we want to raise the price of our token artificially. But the way Render is doing it actually makes sense and brings reason to it, in the sense that the burn mechanism ties in directly with the strength and demand of the network services. According to CoinGecko, there's a total supply of 531,024,271 RNDR tokens, with the current circulating supply around 368,852,897. Overall, the RNDR tokenomics definitely makes sense, and it's not all too hard to understand. There's a network specifically focused on services around rendering and streaming, and the way to access and pay for these services is with RNDR. The progression of the network is reflected in the RNDR token through its burn mint equilibrium. More tokens coming in means the minting threshold is above the value of their services. Having it equal, of course, means it's in equilibrium, and having deflation shows that the demand for these jobs in a time frame exceeds the threshold of tokens that can be distributed as rewards. The Render network is perhaps one of the most unique projects that I've looked into for a variety of reasons. From how the project was founded as a subsidiary from Otoy, to the experience in the team that you wouldn't see out of any other blockchain project, to the different avenues we see them connect with industry leaders, as most times we see tech collaborations in fintech or core infrastructure, whereas this is kind of something completely unique of its own. And this is all, of course, due to how Render has positioned themselves to capture the innovations of DLT through a more visual lens. So with all the digital disruptions in gaming, entertainment, healthcare, and the metaverse, just how long will it be before disruptive technologies like Render Network evolves our virtual reality to becoming rendered indistinguishable from our physical world? Alright, so that's about all we've got for our introduction into the Render ecosystem. It's truly a unicorn in this space given what exactly they're going after. I really don't think there's any direct competition to this project, largely because everyone's focused on developments of the metaverse itself and the distribution of things like streaming. And even if competition does arise down the line, the connections Render has built over the years, and even before that at Otoy, should be plenty to defend themselves and continue thriving. Paired with the connections in their team, and the future of Render looks quite promising, given all the groundwork they've laid and the adoption they've seen over the past few years. If you guys enjoyed what you got out of this video, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe, along with turning that ringer on so you don't miss a thing. We consistently go over deep research within the DLT space, looking into a variety of regulated utility networks and initiatives. And while you're at it, be sure to check out Tokenicer.network for all my content platforms, linked right in one spot. As always, that'll be right down in the description below. But that's about all I've got for you guys today. As always, be sure to keep learning and stay safe. I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.